Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. So once again, we are here doing this special series in honor of Elul about prayer based upon the mimer of the Rebbe Rashab called Kuntres Hatefilla. And today we have arrived at chapter 2. And something that you're going to find interesting about this chapter and about yesterday's chapter and actually about like several chapters to come is that while the topic of this mimer is all about prayer, interestingly enough, the subject matter that we're going to be dealing with in today's chapter and that we spoke about in yesterday's chapter and in the coming chapters is actually not really directly related to prayer at all, but rather it's a lot more connected to learning, specifically to learning Torah, and ultimately to this concept that this word that we've been throwing around a lot, which is meditation, or in Hebrew, the type of meditation we're discussing is Hisbonenus. So before we even get into the body of the text, I want to explain this a little bit and, how these things are connected. Like, why is it that Hisbonenus, this meditation, and specifically meditation that involves learning, is really connected to prayer? Well, it's, amongst Chabad Chassidim, it's a very common practice that people will sit and learn Chassidus before praying. And the idea of this practice is really to emulate the practice of, many, many generations ago, where it speaks about this in the Gemara, actually, where the sages would take an hour before prayer to meditate. And again, what do we mean by meditation and all that? We're going to get to these topics. But so nowadays, the common practice of how this looks, what this looks like, on a daily basis, is this idea of studying before prayer, specifically learning about Hasidic ideas. And that learning Chassidus, learning about godly ideas, learning about these spiritual, lofty ideas, is a form of meditation that's supposed to put a person basically in the right mind space for them to be in when they begin, when they're praying, when they're speaking to God. That's sort of the basic idea with it. But now going back to something that we mentioned in the previous episode where we spoke about prayer and we spoke about how the Rebbe Rashab would frequently speak about prayer and how one of the primary purposes of prayer is the transformation of the self, the transformation of the midos, and to really, make ourselves into more godly beings on a really manifest internal level. One would hope anyways, that, in practicing this meditation, quote unquote, before prayer, this preparation before prayer, this would allow us to be in this state of being that when we do pray, we can tap into this power of prayer, and that we would actually transform ourselves. But yet, lo and behold, we find many, many people who day after day after day, wake up early in the morning, study Chassidus, maybe study like an hour, 2 hours sometimes before they pray. And do they actually feel like that they've changed as people? Maybe yes, maybe no. But it's not so clear. And one of the reasons why the Rebbe Rashab gave over this mimer was specifically for those people who did not feel like that they changed, and they were sort of feeling frustrated by this idea that it's here they are, they're doing what you need to do. This is the instruction that has been given by our Rebbeim, by our holy teachers throughout the past is, how do we best connect with God? Instead of just waking up and praying, learn some Chassidus before you pray. Learn about these godly ideas, and then you'll be in that good mindset, and that will elevate your prayers. That's kind of how it is. But what if this has not been happening to you? What if you don't feel like you're being transformed? You don't feel any core transformation in your desires, in your distractibility, whatever it is. Everybody has a different kind of yetzer hara, different kinds of temptations and stuff like that. And in fact, one might actually see that throughout their life, it's actually getting stronger and harder for them to overcome their temptations in different ways, or that these temptations are just getting stronger, despite the fact that they're learning a lot. So I remember this question had actually come up in a Chassidus class that I attended several years ago, where a woman in the class asked this exact question, where we were learning these very deep Chassidic concepts. I believe the shir was about Shar HaYachud of the Mitzvah Rebbe. If anybody's familiar with that, it's like we're learning these super deep concepts in Chassidus. And a woman in the class very sincerely raised her hand and she said, not to be heretical or anything, but why are we learning this stuff? Like she said, I don't know that I feel changed by any of it. Like I know that I'm supposed to be learning Chassidus. These ideas are very interesting and I know it's a holy thing to do, but wouldn't you hope, isn't the whole point of learning Chassidus to transform us as people? And indeed, she had a really good point. I don't remember what the teacher said, what answer was given, but it was probably something I could imagine that was a similar answer to what we're going to be discussing or we're going to begin discussing it in today's episode, which once again brings us to this topic of meditation, or in other words known as Hisbonenus. And what we'll come to understand, what we'll come to learn, is that this learning before davening, this learning of Chassidus before davening, or really anytime you learn Chassidus, is not actually the meditation. Like that's where the error occurs. People think that we learn, again, in the Gemara, it talks about these sages who would spend an hour meditating before they prayed. And people think, nowadays I do the same thing. I sit down, with my Maimer Chassidus, with my Tanya, whatever it is, I learn before I daven. That's my meditation. And then I pray. And we're going to learn that this is actually a mistake. We're going to learn that the learning itself is not actually the meditation. The learning is, one could say, the preparation for the meditation, and it's like an essential component to give us the tools for meditation, but it's not in and of itself meditation. So today, while we're not going to get the full definition of what we mean by meditation, we're going to start talking about it, and we're going to start talking about what it's not, and we're going to delve into this question that people might have as to why am I not being changed by my learning. So let's get into the text now. Again, we're in chapter 2 of Kuntres Hatefilla of the Rebbe Rashab. And the Rebbe begins this chapter today telling us that all of these things which we've been discussing, the contents of this mimer, are actually not new ideas. These are things that have been outlined and are printed for all. And he says, after all of this, really, it's incumbent upon you to know these things and to understand them for real, like essentially what they're saying, and to meditate upon them during tefillah, which is the main point here. So just to take a pause here, the Rebbe Rashab is saying the main idea here, that the main time of meditation is actually not even before prayer, it's actually during the prayer itself. And he also said that this is something that's actually incumbent upon every single person to take responsibility. So what he's basically saying is that the information, like the material, is available to all. But when it comes down to it, this meditation process that we're talking about, this is something that every single person has to do on their own. It's not something that a teacher can do for you. It's not like if you go to 10 shirim, 20 shirim, it's just going to happen on its own. You ultimately have to do it for yourself. It makes me think of kind of like lahavdil, the idea of going to therapy. People, a lot of times you hear people say oh, that person, they should really go to therapy, or I should really go to therapy. But going to therapy is not necessarily going to change the person. You could have the best therapist in the world. The person ultimately has to want to change and has to put in the work themselves to change. So similarly here too, this is what the Rebbe Rashab is getting at, that the person has to take it upon themselves. They have the responsibility of ultimately implementing this meditation, of which then he says is during tefillah itself, which is the main point, during the prayer, during davening. And he goes on to say that all of the learning and the knowledge that comes before that is really just a preparation for this main thing, which is, what is the main thing? This is that he should be mitbonen, to meditate upon. Again, the translations are always a little tricky because we have a certain association in our modern day world with what meditation is, but it's the best word that we could use to describe this kind of thing. But I'll try to go back and forth between the Hebrew and the English here for clarity. So the main idea is that a person should be mitbonen, to meditate upon them during prayer, really in meditating upon their details specifically. So what does this mean? So speaking of difficulties with translation, the word Hisbonenus that we've been using, that we've been translating as meditation, is rooted, the root of that word is actually the word bina, which means understanding or analysis. And so really the practice of meditation in this sense that we're talking about really has to do with deep analytical thinking, deep contemplation. It could be kind of like it's like a very meditative, analytical type of meditative process. So what the Rebbe Rashab basically says here, and now he elaborates upon this, is that how does one do this? What does that mean to meditate upon all the details? It means to actually expand the explanation about this godly idea that he is meditating upon it, to really understand it in all of its detail. And it's not enough to just meditate upon it in a general sense. So basically what he's saying is, let's say if you go to a shir, before davening, and you hear a shir about Chassidus, and let's say you were able to follow it really well. Like if somebody were to ask you, what was that shir about, you could give it over verbatim pretty much and say pretty much exactly what the teacher said. So the thing is though, when we're learning Chassidus, these ideas, you'll notice even in this podcast, almost every other word that I say, there's so much to elaborate upon. And I personally have to hold myself back sometimes from not going on too many tangents because there's just so much there. So while a person might understand a certain topic, a certain shir in a general kind of sense, it's a very different activity to then go and, think about that particular shir, that particular lesson, and to really think about the details of it all, the details that weren't necessarily expressed overtly, but were there covertly. So for example, let's say take the topic of credit cards. I don't know, just a random example. Let's say somebody learns about credit cards for the first time and how they work, and the idea of interest and credit and borrowing and all those kind of stuff. So, a person can learn about these things and let's say they go to a class about credit cards, very interesting, and they leave. That could be it. They could just kind of have a cursory understanding of how credit cards work, or they could sit there and they could really think about it and think about maybe, start doing research, what are the best credit card companies out there that give the best rates. It could become more personal. It could be what is my credit score? How much credit do I use? What are the implications of my life for this? It could get, really deep and almost maybe dark, what problems are associated with credit card debt? What are the number of people who suffer from depression, who have credit card debt? It can go in so many different directions. It could become more personal, less personal. There's so many different ways a person can sit and meditate on credit cards. And that's just one simple example. But through this, we can see how, you could have two people that go to the same class about credit cards, and one of them leaves and is sort of not super affected by the class at all. They're just oh, that was interesting, go about their day. And another person is really going to take this information to heart and really start to think about this in a real practical way about how credit cards are manifest in the world and in their own personal lives. So same thing here, going back to our topic at hand, talking about learning Chassidus before we pray. A person can go to a class, or they can learn some Chassidus before they pray and just kind of get a general sense of it. Even if they do understand all the details of it, are they really thinking about it afterwards in a detailed way? This is what the Rebbe Rashab wants us to do. And he goes on to say that he says that even if this is something that is already understood, it's not such a complicated topic, and he understands it very clearly, again, he can actually give over the entire shir to someone else. Nevertheless, if while he's praying, he only is meditating upon this in a general sense, this is actually not called true meditation. It's not actually called what we know as Hisbonenus. So why not? Why can't we call this type of meditation Hisbonenus? Is because the light of the innerness of his mind and heart only radiate in a way of makif, in a way of surrounding over the brain. So we're going to explain this and we're going to elaborate, but the basic idea is that if a person is just like meditating upon something in a more cursory way, then the effect it's going to have upon the mind and the heart is going to be cursory. It's going to be kind of superficial. And he says that, a person might, at the moment when they're actually thinking about these ideas, they might get excited in their minds. They might feel this like, oh, wow, yeah, that's a really interesting concept, about a godly concept. And they might even feel it in their heart. They might feel this like desire to get close to God, this ratzo, we call it, or yearning for, running towards God, or a tshuka, a yearning towards godliness. But, and these are pretty harsh words here, the Rebbe Rashab says that this is actually just what's known as a dimayon kozev. This is like a false illusion, or a vain imagination is sometimes how it's translated, and doesn't have any standing power at all, but rather it actually just leaves soon after. And now the Rebbe Rashab quotes Mishlei, where it says Hata'if nechabo. That's from Mishlei chapter 23 verse 5, which means you see it, then it's gone. So it's just like very fleeting. So now there's going to be a bunch of parentheses here, which we're going to get to, but just to know that that's the basic message of this chapter. That is the basic message, is that, this cursory learning of something is not true Hisbonenus. We cannot call that Hisbonenus. Hisbonenus is something else, which we're going to talk about in more detail in further episodes. But really, Hisbonenus, as we'll see, is a much more in-depth processing, thinking about, in a deep way, analyzing, contemplating, focused process. There's a lot of focus involved. But now just to get into the parentheses here. So what the Rebbe Rashab does in this parentheses here is he actually, makes like, through learning about this idea of Hisbonenus, you were saying, Hisbonenus is meditation, but it's specifically like an analytical, it's a mind-based kind of meditation. A person might think that, it's a very intellectual process, and that through having this intellectual process, then the meditation itself is an intellectual process, and it's an intellectual type of excitement. Like, like a person gets very excited about a certain idea, and that will translate into feelings of the heart, that there's this connection like that. And he says that it doesn't really work like that. That first of all, a person might not, just because they get intellectually excited about something, it doesn't necessarily translate into feelings of excitement in the heart. And, sometimes it's true that the heart could kind of follow the mind a little bit, like a person kind of works themselves up into a frenzy, into like an excitement by some idea that they have in their mind. But he actually says this is another false illusion. This is a dimayon shav. This isn't really what we're looking for. This isn't the true type of radiance that we're looking for. But rather, when the light shines in an inner way in his mind, in the pnimiut of his mind, it's in Hebrew, then the heart will like on its own get excited. So he gives an example here of, something physical. Like, I gave the example before of credit cards. I don't know why I thought about that random idea, but again, it could apply to anything. So the Rebbe Rashab says here, he says like when a person really thinks about a good idea or something like very wondrous in the physical world, like think of like one of the 7 wonders of the world or whatever it is, anything that, we all have our individual things that we find exciting. Let's say you really like roller coasters, for example. I have a friend that really likes fireworks, so just thinking about fireworks, she's going to get excited and she's going to want to go for fireworks. Just thinking about fireworks, just seeing like a video of fireworks, she's going to be like, oh, wow. And like actually feel that excitement. It's not going to be something that she's going to have to like generate. It's not something that she's going to have to like, think about the fireworks and meditate, whatever, it's like it's an automatic kind of thing that she's going to feel this excitement towards it. And he says the reason that there's this like automatic excitement that happens in the heart when we think about physical things is because the natural midos, which meaning the midos, the natural emotions of the animal soul, actually don't come from the mind. They're not birthed from the mind, which is elaborated upon elsewhere in Chassidus. Thus, this practice of Hisbonenus is not really necessary when it comes to physical things so much. But rather, what do we need? We need what's known as hitkashrut, connection. We need to feel connected to this object. Like my friend feels very connected to fireworks, for example. I feel very connected to like gymnastics or contortion. Like if I watch a video about somebody doing some really cool back handspring or something like that, it's going to automatically make me excited and want to go practice. But now he contrasts this with the emotions of the godly soul. So whereas the emotions of the animal soul are not birthed from the mind, the emotions of the godly soul are. They actually do come from the mind, as is explained elsewhere, the Rebbe Rashab says. And so thus, because the emotions of the godly soul do come from the mind, then there needs to be this connection between them. There needs to be this aspect of understanding, like the mind needs to be there for the mind needs to be on board, basically, for the heart to feel something. So there needs to be understanding and intellectual meditation, Hisbonenus, and there also needs to be this connection that we're talking about. And so too, when it comes to spirituality, when this light that radiates in the innerness of his mind with good meditation, then the heart will become aroused naturally on its own, with this type of ratzo, with this running towards God, as will be explained. But when the light shines in his soul only in a way of makif, only in a way of this like more like surrounding kind of light, then this isn't going to cause the heart to get excited. And if it does get excited, then it's just a false illusion. It's not like true excitement, really. And thus, if the connection is not a deep and essential one in the way that comes about through Hisbonenus, then it's not going to actually lead to anything actual, true action. And it's definitely not going to cause this like overtaking of the character traits, of the natural character traits of the animal soul to subdue them. But rather, they're going to remain just as strong as before without any kind of change at all. And this brings us to our very complaint that we began talking about in the beginning of this episode, that a lot of Chassidim complain about this idea that even though they learn a lot, they learn so much Chassidus and they pray, they don't feel like that there's any change in their inherent character traits of their animal souls, which are just as strong as before. And if anything, they actually feel that they're even stronger than before. And this is the reason for it. Now we can understand. Because learning in and of itself and knowing something, like just knowing something on an intellectual level, is not what's going to actually subdue the negativity of the animal soul. And now another parenthesis here, where the Rebbe Rashab explains, people do not usually get refined from above to below. What does he mean by this? A refinement of the soul doesn't usually happen through learning Torah. So through refinement, like learning Torah is sort of like, this process that happens from above to below, where this Torah that's very lofty, we're learning it and it's coming down below through our learning. So that doesn't usually refine a person, just that process. Unless there are some very high souls that this does happen to, like what comes to mind for me, this isn't written about in the Mimer, but I'm thinking about the idea of Shimon Bar Yochai, the whole story of when he stayed in a cave for 12 years and he studied Torah, and it's taught that he didn't even pray during that time. And the explanation for this is that this specific transformation, this clarification, this refinement of the soul that that's supposed to happen when we pray, actually he was able to accomplish this through learning Torah. But for most souls, this is not how the soul gets refined. And in fact, the Rebbe Rashab says that the refinement really happens from below to above. So how does this happen? This happens through prayer. This is why we need prayer. And it's not just through prayer, but it's through the Hisbonenus that happens during prayer, proper Hisbonenus, proper meditation. So if this meditation is just in a way, a cursory way, if it's just in a way of makif, we call it, this is not going to cause any change at all to the natural midos, to the natural character traits. And not only that, they're actually going to get stronger with time. And then he concludes and he says that this is because the Hisbonenus, this meditation, is just being done in a cursory way, and this cannot be considered service at all. It cannot be considered avoda at all. So, and then again, just like in chapter 1, the Rebbe Rashab gives a summary here, and in the summary he says that we explained this idea that learning and knowledge is actually just a preparation for the meditation during prayer, for the Hisbonenus during prayer. And the Hisbonenus, the meditation, the main thing is actually to do it at length and in an inner way, and that is what's going to cause it to become substantiated in actual action. That's where we're going to actually see a change. So that is it for today. So that's the conclusion of chapter 2. So just again, the main takeaway from this is that if you don't feel changed when you learn Chassidus, it most likely means that you are not taking that next step of not just learning these ideas, but actually going and meditating upon these ideas in depth and spending the time to really contemplate and think about these ideas in a really deep and real way, like really integrating the ideas into your mind and into your heart. And only through doing that will you actually see that your learning will make a difference in your life and in who you are as a person. So we're going to continue along these lines in our next episode. So stay tuned for that, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.